The November wind off Lake Geneva cut through my coat like it wanted to remind me I didn't belong here. I pulled my scarf tighter and hurried toward the service entrance of the Hotel Beau Rivage, my breath forming small clouds that disappeared before they could mean anything. Inside, the kitchen was a wall of heat and shouting, all stainless steel and efficiency. I tied my apron and checked my reflection in the polished counter, dark circles under my eyes, hair scraped back so tight it hurt. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman holding herself together with dental floss and spite. The divorce papers had been signed 3 weeks ago. My grandmother's diagnosis had come 2 weeks after that. The universe, I'd decided, had a terrible sense of timing. "Lena, you're on the executive floor tonight," Margaret said, not looking up from her clipboard. "Private event. Billionaires and their enablers. Keep your head down, smile, don't make eye contact unless they speak first." I nodded. I'd perfected invisibility over the years. It was safer that way. The elevator to the executive floor was all mirrors and soft lighting, designed to make wealthy people feel even better about themselves. I studied my reflection and practiced my service smile, pleasant, forgettable, the kind that said I'm here to help and then disappear. The doors opened onto a world of cream marble and original artwork, where the carpet was so thick it swallowed sound. The guests were already arriving, men in suits that cost more than my yearly rent, women dripping in jewelry that could fund a small nation's healthcare system. I moved through them like a ghost, refilling champagne flutes, collecting empty plates, existing in the negative space between conversations about mergers and Mediterranean yachts. Then I felt it, the weight of someone's attention, different from the usual dismissive glances. I turned slightly and saw him across the room. He stood apart from the clusters of networking executives, perfectly still in a way that suggested complete control rather than awkwardness. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of face that belonged in Renaissance paintings, all sharp lines and contained intensity. He wasn't looking at the woman trying to engage him in conversation. He was looking at me. I turned away quickly, heart doing something complicated in my chest, and focused on clearing a nearby table. But I could still feel his gaze, heavy and deliberate, like he was reading something written on my bones. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. I slipped into the service corridor, pulled it out with shaking hands. 5 missed calls from the hospice. My stomach dropped through the floor. The 6th call came as I was staring at the screen. I answered in Polish, my first language rushing out in a panic stream. Ko si stalo, CZY Babsha. "Ms. Kowalska, your grandmother is stable, but she's asking for you. She's very agitated. Can you come?" "I'm working, I can't just—" I switched back to Polish without thinking, the language of my childhood, of my grandmother's stories, of the only home I'd ever really known. "Piarzyjej tak szybko, jak byd mogla. Pros powiedzyk jej, z ja kachem." I hung up, pressed my forehead against the cool wall, tried to breathe through the tightness in my chest. Grandma Zofia was all I had left. The thought of losing her made me feel like I was drowning on dry land. "Your grandmother is ill." I spun around. He stood 3 feet away, the man who'd been watching me. Up close, he was even more unsettling, not because he was threatening, but because he looked at me like I was actually visible, like I mattered in the architecture of his attention. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have taken a personal call, I'll—" "You speak Polish," he said. It wasn't a question. His accent was Swiss French, educated, the kind that came from generations of private schools and careful grooming. But there was something else underneath it, something harder. "Yes," I straightened, defensive. "Is that a problem?" "On the contrary." He tilted his head slightly, studying me with an intensity that made my skin warm. "It's extraordinarily convenient. I'm Dominic Valery. I own this hotel, among other things, and I find myself in need of someone with your particular skills." The ballroom hummed with the controlled chaos of powerful people pretending to enjoy each other's company. I'd returned to my post, but I couldn't shake the feeling of Dominic Valerie's eyes following me through the crowd. Every time I glanced in his direction, he was engaged in conversation, a hand on someone's shoulder, a quiet word that made men in expensive suits nod seriously. But I knew he was still watching. The woman beside him, silver-haired and dripping in diamonds, laughed too loudly at something. He smiled, all charm and practiced ease, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those stayed cold, calculating, the smile just another piece of expensive tailoring he'd put on for the evening. I was collecting empty glasses near the terrace doors when I felt someone behind me. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that I caught the scent of his cologne, cedar and something darker, bergamot maybe, the kind of fragrance that whispered money and danger in equal measure. "My head of security will escort you to my office when your shift ends," Dominic said quietly. "We have business to discuss." "I haven't agreed to anything." "Not yet," I could hear the smile in his voice. "But you're curious, and you need help. I'm offering both." He moved away before I could respond, sliding back into conversation with a Middle Eastern man whose watch could probably pay for Grandma Zophia's treatment for a year. I watched him navigate the room, the way people leaned in when he spoke, the subtle deference in their body language. This wasn't just wealth. This was power, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. My shift ended at 11. Margaret gave me a strange look when Pierre, the head of security, appeared at the kitchen entrance and asked for me by name. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I have no idea," I said honestly. Pierre was professional and silent, leading me through corridors I'd never seen, past artwork that belonged in museums, to an elevator that required a key card. We rose in silence. The doors opened directly into an office that was all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake, the city lights reflecting off the black water like scattered diamonds. Dominic sat behind a desk that looked antique and probably was, reviewing something on a tablet. He didn't look up immediately, and I realized this was a test. Would I wait patiently, fidget, fill the silence with nervous chatter? I did none of those things. I was too tired for games. "Mr. Valerie, I have a grandmother in hospice and a second-shift morning job that starts in 7 hours. If you have an offer, I'd appreciate hearing it." He looked up, and something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe. He set the tablet aside and gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." I remained standing. "I'm fine here." The corner of his mouth lifted. "You don't trust easily." I stopped trusting expensive men in nice suits when I signed my divorce papers. "Smart." He stood, moved to a cabinet and pulled out an envelope. "I have business interests that require frequent travel to Poland. My usual translator quit yesterday, personal reasons, family emergency, the details don't matter. I need someone fluent, discreet, and available immediately. The position pays €50,000 for 3 months of work, plus all expenses." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "That's insane. No one pays that much for translation." "I do, because I'm not just paying for translation. I'm paying for loyalty, discretion, and availability at irregular hours." He held out the envelope. "Inside is a first-class ticket to Warsaw, departing tomorrow at 9 a.m. and €10,000 advance payment. Cash. Consider it a gesture of good faith." I stared at the envelope like it might bite me. "And what exactly are these business interests?" "Import-export primarily. Logistics. Nothing that will trouble your conscience, I assure you." His voice was smooth, practiced. "I need someone who understands context, who can read between the lines during negotiations. Someone invisible enough that my business partners will speak freely." There it was again. Invisible, the word that had defined my entire adult life. "And if I say no?" "Then you return to your shift tomorrow, and we never speak again." He set the envelope on the desk between us. But your grandmother needs care that's beyond what the state provides. I'm offering you the means to give it to her. You know nothing about my grandmother. I know she's at St. Catherine's Hospice. I know her primary physician is Dr. Marchand, who's competent but overworked. I know she has late-stage pancreatic cancer and that you visit every day during your break between jobs. He said it without cruelty, just facts laid out like items on a balance sheet. I know you're drowning, Ms. Kowalska. I'm throwing you a rope. Whether you grab it is entirely your choice. My hands were shaking. I clasped them behind my back. You investigated me. I did my due diligence. I always do. That's not due diligence, that's surveillance. Call it what you like, the offer stands. He walked to the window, hands in his pockets, giving me space to breathe, to think. There's a car waiting downstairs. It will take you wherever you need to go tonight. Tomorrow morning, if you choose to accept, it will take you to the airport. If not, it will take you to work. Either way, keep the advance. Consider it compensation for your time tonight. I stared at his reflection in the window, trying to read the angle, find the trap. But all I could see was my own exhausted face, the desperation I'd been trying to hide from everyone, including myself. What if your business partners realize I'm not just a translator? They won't. You're very good at being invisible, Lena. He turned back to face me, and for the first time I saw something almost like respect in his expression. But I see you, and I know survival when I recognize it. We're not so different, you and I. I picked up the envelope. It was heavier than it should be, weighted with possibility and danger, and the kind of choice that changed everything. The address is in there too, Dominic said softly. For tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. the car will be waiting. I walked out without another word, the envelope burning a hole in my coat pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The car that waited outside was a Mercedes, sleek and black, the kind of vehicle that came with a driver who knew when not to make conversation. He held the door open, and I slid into leather seats that probably cost more than everything I owned. The city slid past the tinted windows, late-night Geneva transforming into a blur of light and shadow. St. Catherine's Hospice, I said. The driver nodded once and adjusted his route without comment. I opened the envelope in the backseat. 10,000 euros in neat stacks wrapped in paper bands. A first-class ticket to Warsaw. And beneath that, a card with an address in Geneva's old town, Rue de la Fontaine, a street I vaguely knew, where the buildings had history and the rent had zeros I couldn't count. My phone rang. Margit. Are you okay? Pierre never escorts service staff anywhere. Did you do something wrong? I'm fine. I might have a new job. Doing what? I'm not sure yet. I looked out at the lake, dark and infinite. Maybe something stupid. Grandma Zofia was asleep when I arrived, her face peaceful in the dim light of her room. I sat in the chair beside her bed, held her hand and watched her breathe. She looked smaller every time I saw her, like she was slowly being erased from the world. I met someone tonight, I whispered in Polish. A dangerous man offering dangerous money. You'd tell me to run, wouldn't you? She stirred but didn't wake. I thought about all the stories she'd told me as a child, about surviving the war, about coming to Switzerland with nothing, about building a life from ash and determination. She'd never taken the easy path, but she'd never taken the stupid one either. I stayed until the nurse gently suggested I get some rest, that they'd call if anything changed. I kissed Grandma Zofia's forehead and left before I could start crying. The driver was waiting exactly where I'd left him, like he'd never moved. He took me home without being asked, pulled up in front of my apartment building, a converted factory building in the industrial district, where the rent was almost affordable and the heating was theoretical. 5 a.m., Ms. Kowalska, he said, if you choose. I climbed 4 flights of stairs to my studio apartment, let myself in and stood in the middle of the room I'd rebuilt my life in. It wasn't much, a bed, A table, two chairs, books stacked against the walls because I couldn't afford shelves. But it was mine. Clean, safe, invisible. I set the envelope on the table and stared at it. Dominic Valery knew too much. He'd investigated me, knew my routines, my vulnerabilities. He'd offered exactly enough money to make me desperate, wrapped in just enough mystery to make me curious. Every instinct I'd developed during my marriage, the ones that had finally convinced me to leave, screamed that this was a mistake. But those same instincts had also told me I deserved better than a man whose love felt like slowly drowning in lukewarm water. I thought about Grandma Zophia's face, the way she tried to hide her pain so I wouldn't worry, about the medical bills stacking up, the treatments insurance wouldn't cover, the experimental options that existed only in the realm of money I'd never have. I packed a bag at 3 a.m. Practical clothes, nothing flashy, everything I could afford to lose if this turned out to be the kind of mistake you didn't come back from. I wrote a note for my landlord, paid 3 months' rent in advance with some of the cash, and left it in an envelope under his door. At 4:30, I sat on the front steps and waited. The Mercedes arrived at 4:55. The same driver, the same careful silence. He took my bag without comment and held the door open like I was someone who mattered. Geneva passed in the pre-dawn darkness, the city still sleeping, unaware that I was leaving it behind. We crossed the river, climbed into the hills where the wealthy lived behind gates and hedges, and stopped in front of a building that looked like it had witnessed centuries and kept all their secrets. "Third floor," the driver said. "Mr. Valery is expecting you." The entrance hall was all marble and old-world elegance, the kind of place where whispers echoed. I took the stairs. An elevator felt too passive, like giving up control, and found the door already open. Inside was more space than I'd seen outside of hotels. High ceilings, original moldings, furniture that was beautiful in its restraint, and windows everywhere, flooding the rooms with the pale light of early morning. Dominic stood in the kitchen, making coffee with the kind of focused attention most people reserved for surgery. He glanced up when I entered, and something in his expression shifted, not quite relief, but close. "You came." "I'm here," I corrected. "That's not the same as staying." "Fair enough." He poured 2 cups, handed me one. "We leave for the airport in 30 minutes. There's a room prepared for you down the hall, shower, fresh clothes if you need them. I took the liberty of guessing your size." "You take a lot of liberties." "I'm efficient." He leaned against the counter, studying me over the rim of his cup. "And I don't waste time on people who aren't worth the investment." "Is that what I am, an investment?" "You're a valuable resource who happens to be in a difficult situation. I'm offering a solution that benefits us both." He set his cup down. "But I need to be clear about something, Lena. The work I do exists in shades of gray. Nothing illegal, nothing that will land you in prison, but not everything is conventional. If that makes you uncomfortable, tell me now, and I'll have Pierre take you home. No judgment, no consequences." I sipped the coffee. It was perfect, strong, slightly bitter, exactly what I needed. "And if I stay?" "Then you follow my rules. You don't ask questions I'm not ready to answer. You don't share what you see or hear with anyone. And you trust that I know what I'm doing even when it doesn't make sense." He held my gaze. "In return, I'll make sure your grandmother gets the best care available. Not someday. Today. While we're in the air, I'll have my assistant arrange for a specialist consultation. Swiss-trained, discreet, and very expensive." "Why?" The word came out sharper than I intended. "Why do all this for someone you don't know?" "Because I can. Because I need you focused, not distracted by worry. And because—" he paused, something flickering across his face too fast to read. "Because I understand what it's like to watch someone you love slip away while you're powerless to stop it." The apartment was silent except for the distant sound of the city waking up. I thought about everything I was leaving behind, the safety of anonymity, the predictability of poverty, the small life I'd carved out of the wreckage of my marriage. Then I thought about Grandma Zophia's hand in mine, paper-thin skin over bird-hollow bones, and the way she'd looked at me last night like she was already saying goodbye. "Show me the room," I said. Dominic's smile was small but genuine. "Down the hall, second door on the right." The room was simple but elegant, cream walls, a bed with sheets that looked like they cost more than my monthly salary, a bathroom with marble floors, and a shower that had more settings than my television. On the bed lay clothes, carefully folded, dark slacks, a cream silk blouse, a cashmere cardigan, leather flats. He'd guessed my size perfectly, which should have felt invasive but somehow just felt inevitable. I showered quickly, letting the hot water wash away the last of my hesitation. When I emerged, Dominic was waiting by the door, jacket on, car keys in hand. "Ready?" "No," I said honestly, "but I'm coming anyway." Geneva's airport was quiet in the early morning, the check-in area populated mostly by business travelers and wealthy tourists. Dominic bypassed the main terminal entirely, leading me to a side entrance where a discreet sign read, "Private Aviation." "We're not flying commercial," I said, stopping. "I prefer privacy," he glanced back. "Is that a problem?" "I don't know yet." The private lounge was all leather chairs and modern art, silent except for the whisper of filtered air and the distant sound of jet engines. A woman in a crisp suit appeared with tablets and documents that Dominic signed without reading, the kind of blind efficiency that came from routine. "Ms. Kowalska will need credentials," he said. "Standard protocol. Have them ready when we land." The woman nodded and disappeared. "Credentials for what?" I asked. "Access, security clearance. The buildings I work in don't let just anyone walk through the doors." He handed me a tablet. "Read this and sign at the bottom. It's a standard non-disclosure agreement, legally binding but not sinister. Everything you see and hear in the course of your employment remains confidential." I read it carefully, looking for traps. The language was standard enough: non-disclosure, non-compete, confidentiality clauses. What caught my attention was the penalty section. Violation of the agreement would result in immediate termination and legal action, but no specific damages were listed. It was intentionally vague, designed to scare without revealing anything concrete. I signed it anyway. I'd already decided to jump, no point hesitating at the edge. The jet was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate. Cream leather seats, polished wood accents, that same cedar bergamot scent I'd noticed on Dominic last night. He settled into a seat by the window and gestured for me to sit across from him. "We'll refuel in Munich," he said. 3-hour flight, then another hour and a half to Warsaw. Use the time to rest. Once we land, things move quickly." A flight attendant appeared, young, professional, the kind of beautiful that came from careful grooming and expensive maintenance. She offered drinks, snacks, asked if we needed anything with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to read important people's moods. "Just coffee," I said, "thank you." Dominic ordered the same, then pulled out his phone and began typing with the focused intensity of someone running an empire from 30,000 feet. I watched Geneva shrink beneath us, the lake transforming into a blue jewel, the Alps rising in the distance like the edge of the world. "Tell me about your grandmother," Dominic said without looking up from his phone. "Why?" "Because I'm curious, and because we have 3 hours to kill." He glanced at me. "Consider it part of the job. I need to understand you, Lena, not just your skills, but your motivations, your limits, your loyalties." "That sounds like you're trying to find leverage." "I'm trying to understand the person I'm trusting with my business." He set the phone down. "There's a difference." I considered refusing, but the truth was, talking about Grandma Zofia made her feel closer, less like something I was running away from and more like something I was running toward. "She raised me," I said. "My parents died when I was 8, car accident on the way to visit her. She was supposed to be a weekend destination, but she became home. She taught me Polish, taught me to cook, taught me that survival was an art form that required both steel and grace. She sounds formidable. She survived a war, refugee camps, starting over in a foreign country with nothing. Formidable doesn't begin to cover it. I looked out the window, watching clouds slide past like thoughts. She didn't want me to marry him, my ex-husband. She said he had soft eyes and hard hands, that men like him used kindness as camouflage. She was right. It wasn't a question. I nodded anyway. 3 years, I said quietly. It took me 3 years to realize she was right, to find the courage to leave. By then, I'd lost most of my friends, my confidence, my sense of who I was without him. I met Dominic's gaze. So yes, I understand leverage. I understand what it feels like to be someone's investment rather than their equal, if that's what this is. It's not. His voice was firm, certain. What this is, Lena, is a transaction between two people who understand the cost of survival. You need money, I need discretion and skill. Everything beyond that is negotiable. The flight attendant returned with coffee. Dominic thanked her by name, Sophie, and she smiled like he'd given her something valuable. We flew in silence for a while, the jet engines a steady hum beneath the quiet. I sipped my coffee and tried not to think about what I was flying toward, only what I was flying away from. My assistant will meet us in Warsaw, Dominic said eventually. His name is Alexander, call him Alec. Polish, mid-30s, efficient to the point of being unsettling. He's been with me for 5 years, knows everything, says very little. You'll like him. What if I don't? Then you'll tolerate him professionally because he's essential. Dominic's smile was slight. I don't hire people for their charisma, Lena. I hire them for their competence. Alec is the most competent person I've ever met. And what about me? What makes you think I'm competent? You survived a marriage that tried to erase you. You rebuilt a life from nothing. You worked 2 jobs while caring for a dying grandmother and still managed to show up every day looking like you're holding yourself together. He leaned forward slightly. That's not just competence. That's steel wrapped in silk. That's exactly what I need. The compliment landed somewhere complicated in my chest. I wasn't used to being seen as strong. My ex-husband had specialized in making me feel fragile, breakable, dependent. Hearing the opposite from a man who looked like he could buy and sell entire countries was disorienting. Tell me about your business, I said, changing the subject. The official version. Import-export, primarily Eastern European goods into Swiss markets. Luxury items, some industrial equipment, strategic partnerships with manufacturers looking for Western distribution. He said it smoothly, like he'd practiced. Perfectly legal, occasionally complicated by international regulations and competitive territories. And the unofficial version. Later, he picked up his phone again. For now, that's all you need to know. We landed in Munich for refueling. I watched ground crews swarm the jet, efficient and fast, while Dominic made phone calls in rapid-fire French. When he finally hung up, he looked satisfied. Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman will see your grandmother tomorrow morning, he said. She's Swiss-trained, specializes in palliative care and pain management for cancer patients. One of the best in Europe. She doesn't usually take new patients, but she owes me a favor. My throat closed up. How much will that cost? Nothing you need to worry about. He stood, stretched. Consider it part of your signing bonus. I can't accept that. You already did, the moment you got on this plane. He looked at me and something in his expression softened. Let me do this, Lena. Not everything is a trap. Sometimes help is just help. I wanted to believe him, but I'd learned the hard way that everything came with a price, and the more generous the gift, the steeper the eventual cost. We were airborne again within 30 minutes, Warsaw growing larger on the horizon. I pressed my face against the window and tried to remember the last time I'd been home. 3 years. 4. The city looked different from the air, cleaner, more modern, like it had grown up while I wasn't paying attention. "Welcome home," Dominic said softly. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place I'd left behind, a skin I'd shed. I was something else now, something shaped by survival and necessity and the desperate mathematics of impossible choices. The jet touched down smoothly, taxiing toward a private hangar where a black SUV waited, sleek and anonymous. A man emerged from the driver's side, tall, lean, dark-haired, with the kind of face that gave nothing away. He nodded at Dominic, glanced at me once, and opened the rear door without speaking. "Alec," Dominic said by way of introduction. "This is Lena Kowalska. She'll be working with us." Alec's handshake was brief, professional. "Welcome," he said in Polish, his accent pure Warsaw. "Your luggage will be delivered to the apartment within the hour." "Apartment?" "You'll be staying in the city while we're here," Dominic said, sliding into the SUV. "Separate from my residence, but close enough for convenience. Fully furnished, secure, yours for the duration of your employment." The city unfurled around us as we drove. Cobblestone streets and modern glass, history and progress fighting for space. We crossed the Vistula River, its waters dark under the afternoon sun, and climbed into a neighborhood I didn't recognize, where buildings wore their age like expensive jewelry. The apartment was on the fourth floor of a pre-war building that had been restored with obvious care. High ceilings, original parquet floors, windows that overlooked a quiet courtyard. It was beautiful in an understated way, the kind of place where you could breathe without feeling watched. "There's a car at your disposal," Alex said, handing me keys. "Driver available 24 hours if you need it. Your phone has been upgraded. New number, encrypted. Everyone you need to reach is already programmed in." He paused. "Including the hospice in Geneva. I took the liberty of informing them you'd be traveling for work but remained available for emergencies." I stared at the phone. "You think of everything." "That's my job." His expression didn't change. "Mr. Valerie will send details about tomorrow's schedule this evening. Until then, rest, acclimate. The work begins soon." He left without ceremony, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that made my stomach tight. I stood in the middle of the apartment and tried to process what I'd done. 48 hours ago, I'd been invisible, barely surviving, one crisis away from collapse. Now I was in Warsaw, in an apartment I could never afford, working for a man whose business existed in shadows and implications. My new phone buzzed, a message from a number labeled Dominic. "Dr. Hoffman will call your grandmother's hospice within the hour. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we work." I sat on the sofa, leather, buttersoft, and let myself feel the weight of everything I'd left behind and everything I'd stepped into. Then I called the hospice. "St. Catherine's, how may I help you?" "This is Lena Kowalska. I'm calling about my grandmother, Zofia Kowalska. I'm traveling for work, but I wanted to check in." "Oh, Ms. Kowalska, yes, we were just informed. Your grandmother is resting comfortably, and we received a call from a Dr. Hoffman. She's scheduled to consult tomorrow morning. We don't usually have specialists of her caliber making house calls." "I know," I said quietly. "Thank you for accommodating it." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my beautiful temporary home and wondered what I'd sold, and whether I'd ever be able to buy it back. The morning came too early, light filtering through unfamiliar curtains in a room that smelled like furniture polish and possibility. I dressed carefully, the clothes from yesterday, which somehow fit perfectly despite never being measured, and tried not to think about how Dominic had known my size, my style, the exact balance between professional and forgettable. My phone buzzed at 7 a.m. A message from Alec, car downstairs, 15 minutes. I grabbed the bag I'd barely unpacked and headed down. The SUV was waiting, engine running, Alec behind the wheel. Dominic sat in the back, already working on a tablet, his attention absolute. He glanced up when I slid in beside him, nodded once, and went back to whatever consumed him. We drove through morning Warsaw, the city waking up around us, people heading to work or school or wherever their lives demanded. I watched them through tinted windows and felt like I was looking at a life I used to live, already ancient history. "We're meeting with the Kowalski brothers," Dominic said without preamble. "They own a textile manufacturing operation outside the city. Good quality, fair prices, but they're being squeezed by a competitor who's using regulatory pressure to force them out. I'm offering a partnership, distribution access, financial backing, protection." Protection from what? From people who mistake compliance for weakness. He set the tablet aside. "Your job is simple. Translate, listen, watch. The Kowalskis will speak Polish among themselves, assuming I don't understand. I need to know what they're not saying as much as what they are. So I'm a spy. You're an observer. There's a difference." He turned to face me fully. "Business at this level is about reading the room, understanding undercurrents, knowing when someone is lying before they open their mouth. You're my eyes and ears for the conversations I'm not supposed to hear." We drove in silence after that, leaving the city behind for industrial sprawl and then countryside, fields still brown from winter, forests dark against the pale sky. The factory appeared like a monument to mid-century ambition, concrete and glass, functional but aging, surrounded by a fence that looked more symbolic than secure. The Kowalski brothers were waiting in an office that smelled like old paper and ambition. Jersey, the older one, was barrel-chested and suspicious, with hands that looked like they'd built the factory brick by brick. Tomek, younger by maybe 5 years, was thinner, nervous, the kind of energy that came from too much coffee and not enough sleep. Dominic greeted them in careful, accented Polish, and I watched their faces relax fractionally. They'd expected arrogance, the usual Western condescension. Instead, they got respect and an attempt at their language, however imperfect. "Please," Dominic said, switching to English, "speak comfortably. Ms. Kowalska will ensure nothing is lost in translation." We sat around a conference table scarred with years of use, and Dominic laid out his proposal with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Distribution networks, financial investment, access to markets they'd never reach alone. In return, he wanted partial ownership, operational transparency, and what he called strategic partnership. Jersey listened, face unreadable. Tomek took notes compulsively, his pen scratching against paper like an anxious heartbeat. When Dominic finished, Jersey leaned back and said in Polish, "He wants to own us. Dress it up however he likes, but that's what this is." I translated neutrally, watching Dominic's face. He didn't react, just waited. Tomek responded also in Polish, "We don't have a choice, Jersey. Sikorsky is destroying us with inspections and code violations. We're bleeding money. This foreigner might be our only option." "I don't trust foreigners," Jersey said, "especially ones who look like they've never worked a day in their lives." I kept my face blank, translated it word for word. Dominic's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a slight forward lean, a subtle change in the weight of his attention. "Tell Mr. Kowalski," Dominic said calmly, "that I understand his concerns. Trust is earned, not bought, but I didn't come here to own him. I came here because I respect what he's built and because I have resources he needs." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And tell him that Sikorsky's pressure stops the moment we sign partnership papers. Not through violence, not through threats, but through legal channels and strategic pressure. I know people who know people. That's the value I bring." I translated. Jersey's eyes narrowed, but I saw something flicker there, hope, maybe, or at least curiosity. "How do we know you can deliver?" Tomek asked, still in Polish, his voice tight with desperation. "You don't," Dominic said before I could translate, switching back to Polish, his accent thicker but his meaning clear. "But you know what happens if you do nothing. Sikorsky wins, you lose everything and your workers. What, 40 families? They lose their livelihoods. I'm offering a lifeline. Whether you grab it is your choice." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of machinery from the factory floor. Jersey studied Dominic like he was a puzzle with missing pieces, trying to decide if the gaps were dangerous or merely unknown. "We need to discuss," Jersey said finally in Polish, "privately." Dominic nodded. "Take all the time you need. We'll wait outside." The hallway was colder than the office, lined with photographs of workers from decades past, faces full of pride and exhaustion. Dominic stood at the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the factory floor where men and women operated machinery with the practiced ease of routine. "They'll say yes," he said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because they're desperate and I'm offering exactly what they need." He glanced at me. Did I miss anything in their private conversation? Any concerns I should address? "Jersey doesn't trust you. He thinks you're too clean, too polished. He's spent his life building with his hands, and you look like someone who's never lifted anything heavier than a briefcase." Dominic's smile was brief, perceptive. "What else?" "Tomek is terrified. He's been fielding the regulatory pressure, dealing with Sikorski's threats. He's ready to agree to anything if it means the attacks stop." "And what do you think?" The question surprised me. Does it matter? "I'm asking, aren't I?" I considered my words carefully. "I think you know exactly what you're doing. I think this isn't about textiles at all. I think the Kowalskis are a piece of something larger, and I'm only seeing a fraction of the board." "Very good." He turned to face me fully. "You're right. This factory is one of 12 I'm acquiring throughout Eastern Europe. Together, they'll form a supply chain that's efficient, defensible, and, most importantly, legitimate. I'm building something that can survive scrutiny, Lena, something that looks clean in the light." "And what's in the shadows?" "That's not a conversation for factory hallways." He nodded toward the door. "They're ready." I hadn't heard anything, but sure enough, Tomek opened the door a moment later, his face cautiously optimistic. We returned to find Jersey with papers spread across the table, financial records, tax documents, the architecture of his life's work laid bare. "We agree to your terms," Jersey said in Polish, his voice rough. "But I want it in writing that my workers are protected. No layoffs for 2 years, no pay cuts, health benefits maintained." Dominic didn't hesitate. "Agreed. I'll have my lawyers add it to the contract." "And Sikorski?" Tomek asked quietly. "Will receive a visit from regulatory officials who are very interested in his own business practices." Dominic's tone was mild, but there was steel underneath. Sometimes the best defense is showing your opponent how much they have to lose. We spent the next 3 hours going over details, contracts, operational plans. I translated until my throat was dry, watching Dominic work with the precision of a surgeon, cutting away concerns, building trust through small concessions and larger promises. By the time we left, Jersey was almost smiling, and Tomek looked like a man who'd been granted a stay of execution. In the car, Dominic closed his eyes and let his head fall back against the seat. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked tired. "You did well," he said without opening his eyes. "I just translated." "You observed, you analyzed, you understood context." He opened one eye, looked at me. "That's worth more than accurate translation. Anyone can repeat words. You gave me the temperature of the room." We drove through countryside going gold with late afternoon light, and I felt something shift inside me, not quite pride but close. I'd been useful. Not invisible, not diminished, but valuable in a way I'd almost forgotten existed. My phone buzzed. A Geneva number I recognized, the hospice. My heart stopped. "I need to answer this." Dominic nodded. "Ms. Kowalska, this is Nurse Catherine. Your grandmother is fine. Please don't worry. But Dr. Hoffman completed her consultation this morning, and she'd like to speak with you if you have a moment." A woman's voice came on the line, crisp and efficient. Ms. Kowalska, I'm Elizabeth Hoffman. I've examined your grandmother, reviewed her charts, and consulted with Dr. Marchand. I won't lie to you, her prognosis hasn't changed, but we can significantly improve her quality of life in the time she has remaining. I'm recommending a change in pain management protocol, some modifications to her care plan, and, if you're willing, relocation to a private care facility where she can receive round-the-clock attention. I can't afford. The arrangements have been made, Dr. Hoffman said gently. Your employer has been quite clear about ensuring your grandmother receives optimal care. The only question is whether you consent. I looked at Dominic. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. Can I think about it? Of course, but don't wait too long. The facility has limited availability, and I'd like to move her within the week if possible. After I hung up, I sat in silence trying to process. Dominic had kept his promise, not someday, but immediately. He'd bought my grandmother comfort, time, dignity. The gift was enormous, the debt it created even larger. You didn't have to do that, I said finally. I know, he didn't elaborate. Why? Because you're important to my work and I need you focused. Because I can, because, he paused, something complicated crossing his face. Because my father died in a state hospice when I was 16. The care was adequate, the dignity was not. I swore I'd never let someone I cared about die that way. You don't know me well enough to care about me. No, he agreed, but I know what it's like to watch someone disappear in increments. That's enough. We arrived back at my apartment as evening settled over Warsaw, the city lights beginning to glow against the darkening sky. Alec had disappeared somewhere, leaving just the two of us in the car, the engine ticking as it cooled. Tomorrow night there's a dinner, Dominic said. Private, exclusive, exactly the kind of gathering where business is discussed in whispers between courses. You'll accompany me as my translator and assistant. Dress appropriately. There's a wardrobe being delivered to your apartment as we speak. Questions. Who are we meeting? Potential partners, existing associates, one or two people I need to remind why crossing me is expensive. He smiled without warmth. Wear the pearls you'll find in the wardrobe. They're a signal. What kind of signal? That you're under my protection, that touching you would be a mistake. He opened his door, paused. Get some rest, Lena. Tomorrow is when things get interesting. I watched him walk toward a different car, Alec materializing from nowhere to drive him away, and felt the weight of everything I didn't understand pressing down like atmospheric pressure. Inside my apartment, I found the wardrobe he'd promised, an evening gown in deep sapphire, elegant and understated, with a neckline that suggested without revealing, shoes that somehow fit perfectly, and a jewelry box containing a strand of pearls so luminous they looked like trapped moonlight. I lifted them carefully, feeling their weight, their cool smoothness. They were real, of course they were real, and probably cost more than I'd earn in 5 years. I put them on, looked at myself in the mirror, and barely recognized the woman looking back. She looked expensive, protected, owned. I took them off quickly, put them back in the box, and tried to remember who I'd been before Geneva, before Dominic. Valerie had looked at me like I was something worth investing in. That night I dreamed of cold water and warm interiors, of doors that opened onto rooms I couldn't afford to enter, of hands that held without crushing, of chains made of pearls and promises. When I woke, I knew I was already too deep to turn back. The next evening arrived dressed in twilight and tension. I stood in my apartment, wearing the sapphire gown that fit like it had been tailored for my body specifically, the pearls cool against my collarbone. The woman in the mirror looked like someone's expensive secret, and I couldn't decide if that was empowering or terrifying. The car arrived precisely at 7. This time, Dominic emerged to collect me himself, and when he saw me, something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, but recognition, like I'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. Perfect, he said simply. He wore a tuxedo that made him look even more dangerous than usual, all sharp lines and controlled power. As he helped me into the car, his hand rested briefly at the small of my back, warm through the fabric, proprietary in a way that made my breath catch. "Where are we going?" "The Lazianki Palace, private event, ostensibly a charity gala for historical preservation. Actually, a gathering of people who prefer conducting business where walls have history and discretion is architectural." He studied me in the dim light of the car. "You'll hear Italian tonight, possibly Russian. Just listen. Watch faces when people think they're not being observed." "You're asking me to spy on your business partners." "I'm asking you to help me understand context I might miss." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "At this level, Lena, everyone is always performing. The real business happens in the margins. A glance between associates, a careful word choice, the absence of expected warmth. You're good at reading those margins. I saw it yesterday with the Kowalskis." The palace emerged from darkness like a fantasy made solid, all neoclassical columns and manicured gardens, lit with such careful subtlety that it looked like it was glowing from within. We joined a stream of expensive people flowing toward the entrance, where staff checked invitations with the kind of thoroughness that suggested the wrong name would result in immediate, invisible removal. Inside was all gilt and grandeur, rooms designed to make you feel small in the presence of history. Chandeliers threw light like scattered diamonds. String quartet music drifted through air scented with perfume and power. Dominic moved through the crowd like water, greeting people with the exact degree of warmth each relationship warranted. I stayed at his side, translating when needed, invisible when not, watching the choreography of influence. "Dominic, darling." A woman in crimson approached, older, beautiful in the way that required maintenance and money. She air-kissed his cheeks, her eyes sliding over me with assessment. "Who's your lovely companion?" "Lena Kowalska, my translator." "Lena, this is Gabriella Rossi. She owns half the art galleries in Milan." "And the other half resent me for it," Gabriella said, her smile sharp. She spoke to Dominic in rapid Italian, something about a shipment, timing, discretion required. I caught every word but kept my face blank. Dominic responded smoothly, also in Italian, his accent better than I'd expected. They negotiated in euphemisms, art pieces that sounded more like accounting entries, shipping schedules that felt like military operations. After Gabriella drifted away, Dominic leaned close. "What did you notice?" She mentioned a name, Matteo, 3 times, always with slight tension. Someone she doesn't trust but has to work with. "Good, what else?" "She's worried about something coming through customs." She used the word delicate twice, emphasized it. "Whatever she's moving, it's sensitive." "Very good." His hand found the small of my back again, guiding me toward a quieter corner. "Matteo is Matteo Berlusconi, a competitor who's been making moves into Eastern European distribution. If Gabriella is worried, it means he's getting close to something valuable." "Your supply chain." "Exactly." He accepted champagne from a passing server, handed me a glass. "Everything is connected, Lena. The factory yesterday, Gabriella's art shipments, the dinner we're about to attend, they're all pieces of an architecture most people never see." We moved into the formal dining room, where tables had been set with the kind of care that suggested someone's job depended on the fork placement. I found myself seated beside Dominic, across from a Russian couple who introduced themselves as Dmitry and Svetlana Volkov. He was oil and gas. She was elegance and calculation. The meal unfolded in courses and conversations, small talk that contained larger meanings. Svetlana spoke perfect English but occasionally switched to Russian when addressing her husband, quick comments I wasn't sure I was supposed to understand. Midway through the 3rd course, she said in Russian, "He brings a new girl." The other one lasted 6 months before she became inconvenient. Dmitry responded also in Russian, This one looks smarter, more dangerous. Or more desperate, Svetlana said. I kept my face neutral, laughed at something Dominic said in English, played my role perfectly. But I felt their assessment like fingers on my skin, cold and measuring. After dinner, people drifted into smaller groups, conversations fragmenting into private negotiations. Dominic was pulled into discussion with three men I recognized from earlier, something about transportation routes and regulatory cooperation. I stood nearby, nursing champagne I wasn't drinking, watching. That's when I noticed him. A man across the room, silver-haired and expensively dressed, was watching Dominic with an intensity that felt wrong. Not curiosity, not business interest. Something harder. When he caught me looking, he smiled, slow, predatory, and started walking toward me. "You must be the new translator," he said in Polish, his accent Warsaw-educated. "I'm Roman Sikorski." My blood went cold. This was the man squeezing the Kowalski brothers, the competitor Dominic had promised to neutralize. "Lena Kowalska," I said carefully. "Kowalska, Polish then, working for a Swiss criminal, interesting career choice." He said it pleasantly, like he was commenting on the weather. "Tell me, does he pay well? Because employment tends to be short-term in his organization. People disappear, businesses close, it's all very unfortunate." I wouldn't know anything about that. "Of course not, you just translate." His smile never reached his eyes. "But maybe you should start paying attention to what you're translating. Valerie isn't building businesses, my dear. He's building an empire that will crush anyone in its path, including you." Before I could respond, Dominic appeared at my side, his presence sudden and absolute. "Sikorski, I didn't realize you'd been invited." "I go where business takes me." Sikorski's smile remained fixed. "We should talk, you and I, about territories, about respect, about the consequences of expansion." "My office tomorrow, bring lawyers." Dominic's tone was pleasant, final. "Now if you'll excuse us, we have other engagements." His hand pressed against my back, guiding me away, not roughly but with clear intent. We moved through the crowd, through doors, into a courtyard where the night air was sharp and clean. "What did he say to you?" Dominic asked. "That you're dangerous, that people who work for you disappear, that I should be careful." He's not wrong about the first part. Dominic turned to face me, his expression serious. "I am dangerous, Lena, but not to you. Sikorski is trying to scare you, create doubt, turn you into leverage against me. Don't let him." "Is he right about people disappearing?" "Competitors who cross certain lines tend to find their business opportunities diminishing. That's not the same as disappearing." He stepped closer, and I could smell his cologne, cedar and bergamot, and something darker. "I need to know you trust me. Not blindly, not stupidly, but enough to stay in this room when things get complicated." "Why should I trust you?" "Because I've kept every promise I've made to you. Because your grandmother is receiving world-class care. Because I'm honest about what I am, even when it's not flattering." His hand came up, fingers brushing the pearls at my throat. "And because these mean something. They mean you're mine to protect, and anyone who forgets that pays a price." The touch was brief, impersonal, but it sent electricity down my spine. I stepped back, needing distance, needing air. "I'm not yours." "No," he agreed. "You're your own. But while you're working for me, my protection extends to you whether you want it or not. That's not negotiable." We returned to the party, but the evening had shifted. I caught Sikorski watching us from across rooms, his expression calculating. Dmitri and Svetlana whispered more in Russian, something about the Polish girl and poor timing. Gabriella cornered Dominic again, her urgency more pronounced. By the time we left, I felt exhausted from the weight of observation, from holding my face neutral while my mind raced with implications. In the car, Dominic was silent, staring out the window at Warsaw sliding past in streaks of light. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "things escalate. Sikorsky will come to my office expecting negotiation. He'll leave understanding the cost of underestimating me. He looked at me. You don't have to be there, but if you are, you'll see exactly what kind of business I conduct. Will it frighten me? Probably not. You're stronger than you think, he smiled slightly. But it will clarify what you've stepped into. After tomorrow, you'll decide whether you want to stay or walk away. Either choice is yours. The car stopped outside my apartment. Dominic's driver opened my door, but Dominic caught my hand before I could exit. Thank you, he said quietly. You did exceptionally well tonight. I just stood there. You observed, you understood, you stayed calm when Sikorsky tried to rattle you. His grip tightened briefly, then released. That's not nothing, Lena, that's everything. I climbed the stairs to my apartment feeling like I was carrying more weight than when I descended. Inside, I took off the pearls carefully, laid them in their box, and stared at them until they blurred. They were beautiful. They were a signal. They were a chain made of moonlight and promises. And I was wearing them willingly. My phone buzzed, a message from Dominic. The meeting is at 10. Car will collect you at 9:30. Wear something professional but not severe. We're conducting business, not a funeral. I sent back, will Sikorsky bring weapons or just lawyers? His response came quickly, both, don't worry, so will I. I lay in the expensive bed in the expensive apartment and tried to remember the woman I'd been in Geneva, invisible and safe. But she felt like someone else's memory, fading already, replaced by someone who wore sapphire gowns and pearl necklaces and stood beside dangerous men while they built empires in the margins. Tomorrow I'd see what those empires cost. Tomorrow I'd decide if I could afford the price of staying. But tonight I let myself imagine, just for a moment, what it felt like to be seen, valued, protected by someone who kept promises and moved through the world like he owned every room he entered. It felt dangerous. It felt necessary. It felt like finally breathing after years of holding my breath. The morning of Sikorsky's meeting arrived cold and bright, Warsaw winter light cutting through windows with surgical precision. I dressed in charcoal trousers and a cream silk blouse, professional without being intimidating, present without being distracting. No pearls today. Those were for signaling. Today required invisibility. The car arrived exactly at 9:30. Alec was driving, his expression as neutral as always, offering no hints about what I was walking into. We drove through the financial district, all glass towers and international banks, before pulling into an underground garage beneath a building that looked like it had been designed to intimidate. Dominic's Warsaw office occupied the entire 23rd floor. We emerged from the elevator into reception that was all clean lines and quiet wealth, white marble, abstract art, a receptionist who looked like she could kill you with a letter opener if properly motivated. He's in the main conference room, she said in Polish. They arrived 10 minutes ago. Alec led me down a hallway lined with frosted glass, past offices where serious people did serious work, into a conference room that was designed for exactly this kind of confrontation. Long table, leather chairs, windows overlooking the city from a height that made everything below look small and manageable. Dominic stood at the window, hands in his pockets, looking down at Warsaw like he was considering buying it. He turned when we entered and his expression was different from last night. Colder, more controlled, the warmth completely shuttered. Lena, good, sit there. He indicated a chair against the wall, not at the table. You're observing, not participating. Take notes if it helps you focus. Sikorsky arrived at 10 exactly, flanked by two lawyers and a man who was obviously security, thick-necked, alert, the kind of presence meant to make you nervous. They settled across the table from Dominic, and I watched the choreography of power. Who sat where, who spoke first, who controlled the silence. Valerie, Sikorsky said, his tone almost friendly. Thank you for seeing us. I think there's been a misunderstanding about operational territories. I'd like to clear it up before things become unpleasant." "By all means." Dominic's voice was mild. "Clarify." "The Kowalski factory. The textile operation you acquired yesterday. That was in my development pipeline. I'd invested considerable resources in preparing the ground, so to speak. Your interference has cost me both time and money. Your interference in their operations, the regulatory pressure, the violations that appeared like clockwork, that was illegal harassment designed to depress their valuation before acquisition, which, I should mention, is a crime." Sikorsky's smile didn't waver. "Strong accusations. Do you have proof?" Dominic nodded to Alec, who produced a folder, slid it across the table. "Documentation of payments from your subsidiary accounts to 3 regulatory officials. Records of falsified inspection reports. Testimony from a factory inspector who's decided cooperation is preferable to prosecution." I watched Sikorsky's lawyers open the folder, saw their faces change as they read. One whispered urgently in his ear. Sikorsky's expression finally shifted, still calm but with an edge of something sharper underneath. "Even if this were true, and I'm not conceding that it is, what do you want?" "I want you to understand boundaries," Dominic said. "Poland is a large country. There's room for multiple operations. But the territories I've claimed are not negotiable. Any future interference with the Kowalskis, with any of my partnerships, will result in this documentation finding its way to prosecutors who are very interested in corruption cases." "That sounds like blackmail." "That sounds like business." Dominic leaned forward slightly. "I'm not interested in destroying you, Roman. I'm interested in coexistence. But that requires respect for operational boundaries. Do we have an understanding?" The room was silent except for the whisper of papers as the lawyers continued reading. Sikorsky's jaw worked like he was chewing glass, but his eyes never left Dominic's face. "And if I refuse?" "Then we both spend considerable time and money on a legal battle that benefits no one. Your reputation suffers. My operations continue unimpeded. The only winners are the lawyers." Dominic sat back. "Or we agree to reasonable territorial divisions. I keep this documentation sealed, and we both focus on growing our respective enterprises. Your choice." More silence. Then Sikorsky stood, his movements controlled. "I'll need to consult with my partners." "You have 48 hours. After that, the documentation goes to the prosecutor's office." Dominic's tone never changed, still mild, still pleasant, still absolutely final. After they left, the conference room felt cold despite the heating. Dominic stood at the window again, silent, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. "That's how it works," he said without turning around. "Not violence, not threats, just leverage applied with precision, showing someone exactly how much they stand to lose if they continue making bad decisions." "What if he calls your bluff?" "It's not a bluff. The documentation is real, the testimony is solid. If necessary, I'll use it." He finally turned to face me. "But he won't force me to. Sikorsky is smart enough to understand when he's lost. He'll divide the territories, save face, and we'll both move forward. And if someone isn't smart enough, then they learn an expensive lesson." He walked toward me, stopped a few feet away. "This is what I do, Lena. I identify opportunities, acquire assets, protect them from interference. Sometimes that means working within the law. Sometimes it means operating in gray areas. But always, I know exactly where the lines are, and I'm careful not to cross them." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what you're part of, because I need you clear-eyed, not naive." He tilted his head slightly. "You're not frightened. I can see it. That was a power play, a demonstration of leverage, and you watched it like you were taking notes for a class. Why?" I considered lying, decided against it. "Because I was married to a man who used power as a weapon. He controlled through cruelty, through making me small. What you just did, that was different. You showed Sikorsky the cost of his actions and offered him a path to avoid consequences. That's not cruelty. That's clarity. Something shifted in Dominic's expression, surprise maybe or recognition. You understand. I understand survival. I understand the difference between power that crushes and power that directs. I stood, needing to move, needing to not feel so exposed under his gaze. What happens now? Now we wait for Sikorsky's answer. In the meantime, we continue building. He checked his watch. I have meetings for the rest of the day. You're free until this evening. Visit your grandmother if you'd like. I've arranged for a car. We'll have dinner tonight, discuss next steps. I thought my grandmother was in Geneva. Dr. Hoffman had her transferred yesterday. She's at a private care facility 15 minutes from here. He said it casually, like relocating a terminally ill woman across international borders was a normal Tuesday activity. I thought you'd want her close while we're working in Warsaw. My throat closed. You moved her. With her consent and full medical supervision, yes. She's comfortable, the staff is excellent, and you can visit whenever you want. He walked past me toward the door, paused. That's not leverage, Lena. That's not a chain. That's just caring for someone who matters to you. Sometimes things are exactly what they appear to be. After he left, I sat in the empty conference room and tried to process. Dominic had moved my dying grandmother to a foreign country, provided world-class care, given me access, and called it simple kindness. But nothing about him was simple. Every action was calculated, every gesture strategic. Even kindness, especially kindness, was a form of power. The question was whether I minded. The care facility was nothing like the hospice in Geneva. This was disguised as a luxury hotel, discreet signage, manicured grounds, staff in elegant uniforms rather than medical scrubs. Inside smelled like flowers and expensive cleaning products instead of antiseptic and quiet desperation. A nurse led me to Grandma Zofia's room. Not a room, a suite, with windows overlooking gardens that were winter brown but still beautiful. And there she was, propped up in a bed that looked more comfortable than any I'd ever slept in, her face peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in months. Lena, her voice was weak but clear, they told me you arranged all this. I sat beside her, took her hand. Not exactly. Your new employer, then, this Valerie man. She studied my face with eyes that missed nothing, even dying. He's dangerous. Yes. And you're working for him anyway. Yes. She smiled just slightly. Good. Safe men don't change anything. Dangerous men, they're the ones who rebuild the world. I'm not trying to rebuild the world, Babsha. I'm just trying to survive it. Same thing. She squeezed my hand. Your grandfather knew dangerous men, worked with them sometimes. There were debts, loyalties, obligations that survived the war. I never told you because you were too young, and then you married that soft-eyed boy and I thought maybe you'd have a quiet life. Babsha. Listen, your grandfather owed a debt to a man named Valerie, not Dominic, his father Alessandro, a debt that was never fully repaid before your grandfather died. These things carry forward, Lena. They echo through generations. My blood went cold. What kind of debt? The kind that saves lives, the kind that can't be measured in money. She closed her eyes, tired from even this small conversation. I'm not telling you to run. I'm telling you to be careful. Dangerous men keep their promises, but they also keep their debts. Make sure you understand which one you're part of. I stayed until she fell asleep, her words circling in my mind like birds of prey. Then I called the number Dominic had given me for emergencies. Yes, his voice was distracted, overlaid with the sound of conversation in the background. We need to talk about my grandfather, about your father, about what I'm really doing here. A pause, then, tonight after dinner, I'll tell you everything. He hung up before I could respond. Dinner was at a restaurant that didn't advertise. The kind of place where reservations were impossible unless you knew the owner personally. Dominic was waiting at a corner table, his jacket draped over the back of his chair, his tie loosened slightly, the most casual I'd seen him. "Your grandmother told you," he said as I sat down. "It wasn't a question. Tell me the truth. Did you seek me out because of her, because of my grandfather?" "I sought you out because you spoke Polish and happened to be invisible in a place where I needed visibility. Your connection to your grandfather, I didn't know about that until I did the background check. But yes, once I knew, it influenced my decision to hire you." "Why?" He signaled the waiter, ordered wine without asking my preference, waited until we were alone again. "My father was many things, businessman, strategist, occasionally criminal when it served his purposes, but he believed in honoring debts. Your grandfather saved his life during the war, helped him get out of Poland when staying would have meant death. My father tried to repay him, but your grandfather disappeared, changed names, built a new life. My father spent years looking, never found him. That debt remained open until the day he died. So I'm what? Payment on an old account. You're an opportunity for me to close something my father couldn't. By helping you, by protecting you, by ensuring your grandmother receives the care she deserves, I'm honoring his obligation. But that's not the only reason you're here, Lena. You're talented, observant, and you understand the architecture of power in a way that can't be taught. The debt is context. Your value is concrete." The wine arrived. I drank without tasting it, trying to process. Everything I thought I understood had additional layers, shadows beneath shadows. What happens when the debt is paid? When my grandmother passes, when 3 months are up, when I'm no longer useful? That depends entirely on you. He leaned forward. "I'm building something, Lena. An organization that spans countries, industries, legal gray areas that will eventually become legitimate businesses. I need people I can trust, people who understand nuance, people who won't break when things get complicated. You could be one of those people if you choose. Or you can walk away with enough money to start fresh, no obligations, no entanglements. And if I choose to stay, then you become part of something larger than yourself. You build, you grow, you learn to wield the kind of power that reshapes possibilities." His eyes held mine. "But I need to know you're choosing it, not being forced by circumstance or debt or obligation. That's why I'm telling you all of this now, so you can decide with clear eyes." The meal unfolded around us, courses I barely registered, wine that tasted like expensive decisions. We talked about logistics, upcoming trips, the timeline for acquiring more manufacturing operations. Business as foreground, personal as undercurrent, the conversation dancing between professional and something more complicated. Over dessert, Dominic said quietly, "You could have anyone you know. You're intelligent, capable, beautiful. You don't need to be here." "Maybe I want to be here." "Why?" I thought about Geneva, about invisibility and survival, about my ex-husband's soft eyes and hard hands, about Grandma Zofia saying dangerous men rebuild the world. Because for the first time in years, I feel like I'm building something instead of just enduring. Because you see me as competent rather than fragile. Because I set down my wine glass. Because being near you feels like standing close to fire, dangerous but warm after so much cold. Something flickered in his expression, want, maybe, or recognition. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine where they rested beside my plate. Just a touch, brief and deliberate, but it sent electricity up my arm. "Be careful, Lena. I'm not a safe investment."